Before I speak, I want you to look at this. My skin rivals that of a caramel macchiato. My skin is about as brown as the bean burrito you get from school lunches. My skin can endure a nice summer day.
So you know it's good.
We come to agreement that my skin is blatantly a darker shade of brown and cannot be seen as any other color, right? Okay, good. Now that my skin complexion is shown, I want to explore a subject we talked about briefly before, passing. While some of you may think of passing as something to do with your least favorite quarterback or something that happens when your aunt offers her famous casserole. But for historical sense, passing refers to a person with skin complexion of a certain hue that the individual can be considered another race or ethnicity. However, more accurately, passing was how marginalized groups avoided the wrath of white Americans in most of the country's history. Optics. You seem to be talking a lot about white Americans and only talking about the bad stuff. Why is that? Well, my sweet summer child, I explored the social, cultural, and political side of history. The social aspect in the United States, for this case, was mostly created by white Americans. What I disclose is historically factual, no more, no less. If it so happens to seem that I'm talking about the bad stuff white people committed, blame those from before who created circumstances for this kind of thing. But back to the topic at hand, passing was or is, but that's a conversation for later, a means groups use to survive a hostile social climate. If you're familiar with the term, you probably think about biracial black Americans who managed to subvert white repercussions because these individuals looked white to the average person. But for this video though, I won't only talk about the biracial black Americans who passed for white, but also the American Jews and Latino Americans who passed as well. First, let's start with the most popular group for the terminology. You might be familiar with black Americans, from jazz to blues to chitlins to Maya Angelou. But for most of American history, for all of American history, black Americans were also subject to targeted acts by the dominant class in the United States. That class being white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or WASP if you remember from the white Latino video. Now the means to survive in a hostile environment was to adapt, a means considered being a social chameleon. This is where targeted groups do their best in blending with the background of society to avoid attacks. A synonym, if you will, to passing. For black Americans, this strat was nearly impossible for obvious reasons. However, over the course of American history, the birth of biracial children brought attention of possible passerbys with mixed blood. God, every word feels so racist, but hey, that's American history for you. Of course, biracial people existed since the beginning of time, but I'm going to stick to the emphasis on American history. Biracial black-white Americans were not spared the discrimination by fully white Americans, except in the instance a biracial person was passable as white. In those cases, that individual can just live normally in society without repercussion, unless someone wants to be a dick and either out them or just randomly say that they weren't fully white. Hell, you want to know how much white Americans hated biracial people? Richard Kearney, Irish scholar and philosopher professor at Boston University, discusses that the hatred to biracial people comes from, and you're not going to believe this, perception that biracial people are close relation to the devil, who was depicted as half man, half goat. The perception that white people were superior humans while blacks weren't human at all made it as dangerous to be biracial in early United States because society saw the people as demonic. To reiterate, people back then believed that biraciality were akin to demonic forces due to a person being half man and half beast in consideration of the times. Thomas Jefferson, yes, founding father Jefferson, created his own algebraic system to determine how much of a percentage a person must have to be considered white or black. The assessment given by American society comes from even the drop of blood rule, which dictates whether or not an individual is pure white or tainted by any form of other race or ethnicity in their heritage. American history, man, it's crazy. But of all the factors in place, of everything threatened if caught otherwise, passing was the means to survive the racist climate of the United States. So it was really a damn situation either way. And it wasn't just black Americans who tried to survive. There's also I'll talk about Jews and Chinese in an upcoming video. Be sure to subscribe and keep those notifications on for that. But the ethnic category of Jew allowed for a considerably easier sense of passing, but it still had to be an attempt nonetheless. Ethnically and spiritually, Jews heralded from a lot of places. While many know the region around modern-day Israel to be the Jewish homeland, yes, I'm aware of the conflicts. We're not getting into that for this video. For that, the skin complexion of Jews varied, but most looked on the whiter side of things. However, if you're in the know of Jewish stereotypes, hold up, it's historical, let me explain. Jews were often perceived with one facial characteristic, and that was the nose. If you go on Twitter, or as the dad who wonders why his kids won't visit him anymore calls it X, you'll find a decent share of stereotypical caricatures that depict Jews having long, large nose. It's a long-term stereotype people used as a means to expose Jews, but was more of a witch hunt that got anyone with a big nose hurt, whether they were Jewish or otherwise. Despite the transgression, Jews were capable of passing as white, and that played a key factor when living in hostile nations like Russia, Germany, or the United States. And you'd think I'm talking about a specific time, but no. It's just been a long history for many white nations to target Jewish communities, but mostly it gained traction after the communist revolution in Russia due to fallen Russian generals spreading the self-written documents to create a scapegoat as to why Russia fell. Due to the majority having a bit of a lighter complexion than other marginalized groups, you see Jews blending in societal background to avoid being the target of discrimination easier. Hell, when the new wave of immigrants hit in the 1850s, Jews among them recognized the plight of black slaves and did what they could to help these escaped slaves flee by using the passing they received as white to trick slave owners or hunters. That's a whole other history though, but perhaps I'll cover it later because come on, who doesn't like seeing marginalized oppressed groups in history stand up against authority? Either way, Jews who recognized the hostility of the social climate, primarily in the southern part of the United States, the South, did what they could to hide themselves and avoid detection at all costs. So for the most part, if a person with Jewish heritage was called out by some bigot, the go-to was deny and deflect to Roman heritage instead. Hey, you come up with a lie on the spot when there's a mob of bigots who got a noose ready for you. Though, now we've sort of explored two sides of the spectrum this far, that there's another that needs to be examined, and that's... We've talked about Latinos before, and we talked about how the group survived the hostile climates of the United States. Here, video question. Please give it a check. It goes better in depth about the white Latino. However, that doesn't mean I'm going to skip this outright and cloud chase off of other videos for you to watch. I'm not a grifter yet. But the rundown of it all comes in two folds as to how a Latino passes as white in the United States. First was the recognition of being seen as white by the rest of American society, and this claim was founded on the notion that Latinos and Hispanics alike were originally from Europe, and they both should be considered white. However, this also connects to the second part to be made that Latinos are white by European descent because several Hispanic and Latinos had complexions similar to white ethnicity. While Latinos come in many shades, this includes the ones with a complexion that pass as white, which are considered to be white Mexicans. And let it be noted that this is the official term accepted by the Mexican government and the individuals in question as well. However, at the time, these were used as fear-mongering tactics among racists to create a sense of paranoia, like it could be anyone you know, so be aware. Another Maple Street incident, if you will. Callback time, man. But in regard to melanin, Latinos were more socially adept to the environment and capable of either being fairly bronze-colored skin or can appear as if they came straight from the European continent. About 27 to 47% of Mexicans today identify as white based on their physical complexion, being similar to that of someone from Europe. Yes, I know you've probably seen more brown colored Mexicans than white ones, but take it up with the Mexican Census Bureau. And yes, I use Latinos and Hispanics, and I'm still only talking about Mexicans. But the country is just right there, and apparently is the only one the United States seems to have hate for, so take it up with the government. Look, the point is that, like other marginalized groups in the United States, Latinos who were able to pass as white blended into society well enough to avoid repercussions, like I've said. But the perk of blending in created opportunity for this specific type of people, and that opportunity was, I just wanna be part of yourself. As I've noted, passing has been a thing that's been around for a bit to survive these 45 United States. I'm sorry, I do not recognize states with directions in their names, so you better figure your stuff out, Dakotas. For those who passed, it was easy to remain silent and abide with societal norms, live a full life, and enjoy the time you had while surrounded by heightened racism. But if you know marginalized groups in history, it was hard to remain still for too long. For some, seeing the plight of oppressed groups stirred a drive to fight for what's right and use the past given as a means to support targeted individuals. Jews between 1850s to the 1960s recognized the advantage of having lighter skin tone and the capability to avoid detection, so many claimed whiteness to promote abolitionism in the states and criticized other members of their own community who were compliant with the acceptance of slavery. For the later aspect of the given timeline, Jews assisted in the civil rights movement largely, but that's a topic for a later video. Passing black Americans also used their lighter pigmentation was help hiding escaped slaves, moving forward the abolition movement, challenging segregation, challenging discrimination, a lot. Passing black Americans did a lot to help many marginalized groups. And of course, it's not to say everyone who passed was an advocate for bringing equal rights to all marginalized groups. Those who recorded who passed, and at the very least did nothing, are those that feared repercussions by white Americans during the time. While passing Jews and newcomers from Eastern Europe advocated for abolition, Orthodox Jews believed the climate to be too violent and hostile for an already persecuted group to handle, and should be compliant with societal norms for the time. Regardless, both sides acted in accordance to what was best while in a society that discriminated against them for not being white. However, this now brings us to modern times adds a new definition to the term passing, and this definition is called invalidity. Society may have not changed much in terms of race relations, but it's more apparent that many individuals invalidate the history that makes up a multiracial person. It sort of ties back to how much a person needs to be considered that race. And honestly, I understand it. My ancestry is mostly indigenous Mexican and Spanish. What other tidbits I do got in me are Scottish, Nigerian, Maltese, and whatever other percentage my ancestors got. But I recognize that I'm more Mexican than the others listed. That's mostly because those others are less than 5%. But what about those with a higher percentile? Does a person born from a black father and a white mother lessen their connection to either heritage? I won't deny either. I find it peculiar if a person who does not appear the description try to connect to their claimed heritage because of my own personal biases. But I recognize too that the person comes from the line of people who practiced those customs long before. If the culture is respected and cherished by this passing person, should they be considered an outsider of their own history? Personally, at a point, you gotta learn that you are far from the side you claim you want to represent. Reading a book and sharing the history you came from is a better way to respect it because let's be honest, I can't go about doing Scottish or Nigerian customs, but still recognize the importance of my bloodline since it, burdens me. It is my heritage and history for its own regard. However, for a person who passes as another race despite having a connection to multiple races, they should be able to participate in practices with that culture without feeling shame. The importance of one's bloodline is the connection to the past and culture of our ancestors, as well as explore where we once were to where we are now. From conquistadors to warriors to via riders to Vietnam soldiers to college historians, man, I pale in comparison to my ancestors. Why couldn't you all be more chill? The past of oneself should be explored and understood. Though perhaps that's from my own value of retaining the past and remembering it as both a historian and a Mexican. Either way, I thank you for stopping by and hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you for the next one before the new year starts. So be sure to subscribe and come on back. Until then, remember, history is made every day, so you decide how you're going to make it.